This is Karith Foster, and you're watching Break It Down.
Yes, the Break It Down show. Doing one of our very favorite things to do is these Save the Brave supporting comedy shows. Karith is a comedian, and that means that I now hand the mic over to Matt Balaker as we try to figure out what's going on this Friday. I'm drinking beers, and that's why I called Matt Mike.
No problem, Paul. I appreciate it.
That's right.
I'm excited. I think this is the first time we've had a godmother of a nephew of mine on the show, so that alone is reason to celebrate. But I could not be more excited to have our next guest. She's a humorist, a comedian, a lecturer, pretty much a 21st century Renaissance woman, a purveyor of joy, happiness, and smiles. The wonderful and talented Karith Foster is with us today.
So thank you. Thank you guys for having me. What a treat.
So with you, there's so much to cover, and we only have like an hour or so. But I actually never really heard the story, Karith, of how you got involved in stand-up in the first place. Do you mind sharing that?
Oh my gosh, yeah. So I call myself a recovered journalist, right? Because that's what I got my degree in. And I went to this really tiny women's college in Columbia, Missouri. I worked for a small ABC affiliate called KMIZ. And guess who one of my coworkers was?
Who?
Savannah Guthrie of the Today Show. Isn't that crazy? So we go way back. So I thought, you know what? I'll transfer schools. Well, not transfer. I'll graduate from my little small school, Stevens College, the second oldest women's college in the country, and I'll go to Mizzou, University of Missouri, where the J School is. But then one of my best friends was working for the Barbara Walters Specials and says, "Hey, Karith, you got to come to New York City. Barbara's starting this new show and they're looking for people." And I'm like, no, I'm terrified of New York. Don't think so. But she's like, "You have to do this." I think she actually went and bought me the plane ticket. Wow. So I hop on a plane, literally 24 hours later, I interview. I get a call 2 weeks later saying I got the job. 2 weeks later, I find myself on the road to New York City to work for what was then to become The View. It didn't even have a name at the time. So I'm at The View, and the first year was like, I mean, it was ridiculous because it was a brand new startup show. Nobody knew what we were doing. And it was 14, 16-hour days. And I didn't have an outlet for creativity. I'd had a radio show in college. I didn't have anything going on. And I felt like my soul was dying. And I jokingly, when I lecture, I tell people about going for your dreams and when you know something's a good fit or not. For me, it felt like The Devil Wears Prada. There's a great line in the film where she says, "A million girls would kill for this job. Why are you miserable?"
Yeah. Why were you miserable?
Right. And I was miserable because I wasn't expressing myself like I wanted to. And there are no accidents. I'm in the bathroom. Well, we shared a studio space with all my children, the now kind of defunct soap opera. And this girl stops me before I leave. And she's like, "Hey, can you watch me do my set?" And I'm like, "You're what?" I'm like, if anybody stops you in a New York City bathroom and asks you to watch them do something, you run.
Don't
stick
good
around
advice.
What they're talking about. But she proceeded to do like 6-7 minutes of stand-up comedy. I'm like, "How did you learn to do that?" Because I always loved it. I used to drag my friends to comedy shows in colleges, but never in a million years was it something that I was going to do. I was not the class clown. I was kind of a goody two-shoes, a little prissy.
What?
It was not like in my, purview. And I saw her do this and I'm like, well, God, maybe this is the outlet I need. And so she actually had signed up for a class at Gotham Comedy Club and she couldn't take it. And so I treated myself. I was making no money. I was so broke. But for my birthday, I treated myself $300 to a stand-up comedy class at Gotham Comedy Club in New York City. And that was my start. And that was August of 1998.
Wow. And so what did you take from the class? Like what did you find beneficial?
Well, just you got to do it. I mean, you're never going to know if you've got the guts unless you do it. Like you can talk a good game and you can heckle from the audience, and not that I ever did that, but you know what I mean? Like you can think about it all you want, but until you actually step on that stage, put that mic in your hand and push past the fear. Now, what's wild is to this day, I probably have 2 or 3 jokes from my very first 5-minute set. Now, some of them are considered totally politically incorrect at this point. 20-some years later, people are like, "You can't use that word. You can't say that." Not that it was even graphic or gratuitous or racist. It just, you know what I mean? But we're just such an interesting age now, as you know very well, Matt.
Well, that was kind of a nice tease. I mean, to the extent you can, Karith, what were some of the words or topics that you covered then that
Sure.
you don't have to say it if you don't want to, but
No. I mean, well, listen. I mean, because I'm actually quoting a real sign, so I guess I can say it because it wasn't my word. But there was an ad years ago that the MTA, which is the Metropolitan Transit Authority, right? So the people that run the subways and the buses and all that they were running. And on the front was a man wearing a Yankees cap holding a baseball bat. His name was Tito. And this is how it read. This is verbatim. It goes, Tito is 30 years old. Tito lives in a one-bedroom apartment in the Bronx. Tito is mildly retarded. Tito works for the MTA. And my first thought was, oh my God, how can Tito afford a one-bedroom apartment in New York City when I'm still living with my cousin in New Jersey? Secondly, every time my train or subway got stuck in a tunnel, all I kept thinking is Tito is pushing the buttons and nobody's stopping him. And that was one of my very first jokes that I ever told on stage.
Very nice. So did you keep in touch with that woman who auditioned for you in the bathroom?
You know, it's very sad, actually, very tragic. She actually committed suicide. Okay. Several years, not to bring the show down.
Yeah, thanks.
But you know how like there are just a lot of messed up people in comedy. You know, they're just people who have issues, and sadly, I think she, had some bipolar stuff going on, and supposedly she got really upset that her real age got put on her IMDb, and she was a little bit older than she wanted the industry to know, and that set her off.
Wow.
So it was really sad. It was very sad to hear that was what her fate was. But very grateful to her for introducing, for being that connection.
Clearly.
That's a crazy story. New York is full
I got
of
lots of them.
Stories. What other kind of impossible New York type things have happened along the way? Because, some lady doing stand-up for you in the bathroom who later kills herself. That's one thing, but I'm sure there's more.
Oh God, there's so many. You know what? I will tell you a great story about stand-up and just the joys that it can bring. Because doing stand-up, there are times when you're at an open mic and you're paying your dues, and there's, it's 1:00 in the morning. There's 2 people in the audience from Bulgaria who barely speak English, and like you're trying to make them laugh. And you're like, why am I doing this? Like, what is my purpose in life? I should have gone to med school. And then there are times like the one I had, I was doing it was an all-female lineup. I was in Bud Lake, New Jersey at this place called Pax Amicus Theater. And it looked like a castle on the outside. And during the day, they would have children's theater and puppet shows for kids. And at night, they would put on real theatrical productions. And a friend of mine, Jody Weiner, and Weiner is her real last name, would produce these shows, she and her husband. And sometimes they'd have like a woman and a man on, and it would be 4 comics each. But the beauty about this show was there was no alcohol. So everybody who was there was like laughing because they were feeling it. They weren't buzzed. They weren't, and so everybody was really on their best behavior. And this was a ladies' night out one. And the show was just on fire. It was me, Maureen Langan, Sherry Davy, and Leanne Lord. And afterwards, people were coming up to us like, "Oh, that was so great! You guys were so funny," and the stuff that you like to hear. Like that's part of our payment as comics because we're not making $1 million a show. And then this one woman makes a beeline to us. It was me and I think Sherry and Maureen. And the first words out of her mouth were, "My son was killed 6 months ago." And we're like, oh my God, like what? Like we all just kind of lost our breath. At least I did. And then she said, "I just want you to know this is the first time I've laughed since." Whoa. And I still get goosebumps and tear up a little bit when I share this story because like that right there, like that's the payment for all the open mics and for getting screwed by a booker who's supposed to give you 500. And he's like, "Oh, we only have 375. And like that's the validation of like, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And I have this gift that I can give to other people who've had horrible, tragic, awful things happen. And for 90 minutes, I can give them a reprieve of that pain."
You have 90 minutes? Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah. I do now. I don't know if I did back then, but you should never have to go longer than 90 minutes.
So did you you ended up staying in New York beyond that? Like so you're at the View, you take this class, the bug bites you, the stand-up comedy bug. How did you then leapfrog to the next step?
Well, I was never going to be the starving artist. Like, I refused. That was not in my repertoire to starve and to scrounge and to, wonder where I was going to get my next paycheck. So I did double duty. I did leave the View after my second year. I had the summer off, and I used that summer to hang out with Patrice O'Neill and Bobby Kelly and Jim Norton and, Keith Robinson and, all the guys from The Cellar and Lisa Lampanelli. And that really is kind of what brought me in to comedy. But my mother at one point was like, please get health insurance. So I'm like, all right, I'll start temping. So I started temping at Estee Lauder. And within about a year, I got brought on full time to work there. And I got to tell you that I feel so fortunate and so blessed. Like, everybody there knew what I was doing at night. They came to my shows. They supported me. I had bosses who would let me leave at lunch and go and host stuff at Sirius XM and have an extended lunch because I also busted my hump at work. So, it wasn't like I was just taking advantage. But they all supported me. And even when I was offered a chance to climb the corporate ladder, and I turned it down because I knew that wasn't what my heart wanted. I'm not a 9-to-5 person. I'll work 80 hours a week for something I love, and I do now in my own business. But they understood. They understood. So I worked full time. I did not sleep. I think I slept 3 to 4 hours a night because I would finish my day at 5:00 and race home. I kept a car in the city like a crazy person. And then I'd hop in the car and drive to Pennsylvania, perform for, $200, if that, and then drive back home, get home about 3 a.m. At least get to bed by 3 a.m. because you're still high from the show, and I did it all over again. So I had a double life, and people are like, what do you do for fun? I'm like, well, I do comedy for fun, but they're like, but that's kind of your job. I'm like, it is, but it's fun.
That's good advice.
The experience at the View, getting that, understanding that you still had the courage to walk up to that mic. It's one thing to want to get into show business or media or whatever, but then you get offered that gig, that chance to build something. You were listing the comedians that you were hanging out with. I know way more of their names than I do the producers and the assistants that were at the View. I'm sure some careers have been launched, but that wasn't what your thing was, I don't think. Barbara Walters is trying to build a big, beautiful machine, but ultimately, the people at the bottom have to work their way up and go somewhere else. And that doesn't seem like that would be in front of the camera somewhere. But
it wasn't. It's not. Listen, of the friends that I started with, and I actually just spoke with one of them. We hadn't talked in 20 years. And I saw it was his birthday on Facebook. And I called him out of the blue. He had the same number, thank God. And we reconnected, and he's now a producer at 2020. I have friends who are executive producers on The Ellen Show who started off as PAs on The View, like, low man on the totem pole. Another friend is a lecturer and course creator at Stanford. Other people are, they're still in media. Some people are still at The View, like 1 or 2 people are still there. So it's, it's the paths that we decide to take. But one of the best pieces of advice that the woman who hired me said was, first, there's only 30 people in this business and they all know each other. So basically it was, don't talk shit about anybody because you don't know who you're going to be working with again in the future. And you don't know who's married to who because the women keep their last names. And it's very incestuous. Like, it's very and everybody does know everybody. And that's how you get onto these other shows. Like, once you're in, you're in. But it wasn't for me, but I've maintained those relationships. And because of that, some really great things have come.
Yeah. Including, well, I don't know if this is from The View, but you worked for a controversial radio host. Can you elaborate on that?
I did. Dun, 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 as my 6-year-old would say. It was because of comedy. So I got the Imus gig. That's who you're referring to, Don Imus, who is now deceased. But I got the Imus gig because I performed at a comedy club in New Jersey. It was like 40 minutes outside of the city. Killed it. And the guy never booked me again.
He was jealous.
7 years later, and that's like how comedy works, the business. You're like, what? Did you see the audience? They love me, and then whatever. And so I get a call. Well, first of all, there was I call it Nappy Gate, right? When I called the Rutgers women's basketball team Nappy Headed Hose. So Nappy Gate happened in April of 2007, and in September of 2007. I get a call from this booker who had booked me 7 years previously, never talked to me again, and said, "Hey, you interested in a radio TV opportunity?" Now, I'm in Kansas City at the time, headlining at what used to be Stanford and Sons Comedy Club. And I'm like, "Yeah, sure. What's up?" "Yeah, of course." He goes, "Oh, so just so you know, it's with Don Imus." And I'm like, "Oh, Nappy Headed Hose, Don Imus." He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Okay." He goes, "How soon can you meet with him?" I'm like, "Well, I'm in Kansas City. I'm headlining. I'm done on, Sunday, but I'm going to Texas." He's like, "Can you not go to Texas and come back to New York?" So I knew it was serious. So I changed my ticket and I come back. And that, I think Monday or Tuesday, I met with Don. I was at his home office.
Wow.
And sitting face to face with one of the most reviled men in media. But you know what? And I shared this. Well, I didn't share this in my TEDx talk, but I did share it in my book. Like, as a comic, knowing that when you're trying to be funny, when you're trying to riff and say something off the cuff, like if you really go back and watch the tape or listen to the tape, those weren't his words. I mean, yes, they came out of his mouth, but he was parroting his producer, Bernie McGurk, who's, also not a bad dude. They were trying to be funny, right? The only problem is it was just a really poor choice of words. It thrust a group of young women who did not ask to be put in the spotlight into a spotlight. And it was really derogatory comments that I don't think either of them knew the weight of. And so it was the perfect storm. Old rich white celebrity says something horrible. And it was a slow news day.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when that. Go ahead, Pete. Sorry.
I was just saying, these kind of stories often happen because we don't take the time to listen to the whole tape and go, "Oh, that's regrettable," but this is not regrettable. Is not racism. It's like,
yeah, poor choice on purpose. That was worse. You know what I mean? Like that was nothing compared to some of the stuff he intentionally said.
Yeah. Right. Or the person reporting about it has intentionally said, like about things. I mean, when that Alec Baldwin tape broke about him hollering at his daughter, it's like, if you recorded everything I said or anybody said and you predicted the worst crap, oh my God, I'd be a monster, But Don Imus's job is to get people to pay attention. And so he does skirt the line. And then if he does the show for a whole year, how many times does he ever even step over the line? His job is to walk on it. And he was really damn good at that.
Listen, the man was a genius. And what's so tragic is that he was just such a damaged person. He was so smart and he could be so funny, but he had his demons, I mean, he was an addict and an alcoholic who sadly never got recovery. He stopped drinking and he stopped doing drugs, but he never did the 12 steps or anything. And he even referred to himself as a dry drunk. So you never knew who you were going to get day to day. And it was like constantly walking on eggshells. And I always said, if I ever had bipolar twins, I'd be prepared.
How long did you work at the Imus show?
So I was there from 2007 to 2009. I was there for 2 out of the 3 years of my contract.
And obviously he's passed, but how would you categorize your experience there? I mean, it helped catapult you in some ways, but it wasn't all peaches and cream. Like,
I another reference, not necessarily a movie reference like Devil Wears Prada, but my Charles Dickens reference, my Tale of Two Cities. I say it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, because it was a dream job. I mean, here I was kind of full circle back into journalism in a way, radio, TV. I got to talk news of the day and incorporate the comedy and be funny. And, and I also kind of was laden with this incredible responsibility to be the anti-stereotype of what we typically see of Black women in the media, which there wasn't much of. Oprah no longer had her daily show. She hadn't started her network yet. There was no Shonda Rhimes or Kerry Washington or Viola Davis. Not that those 3 women or 4 of them, represent all that could be represented. So this was my chance to speak to an audience who probably never interacted with anyone like me before.
What is the stereotype for a Black woman in your business at that time? What was it?
Loud, crass, neck rolling, talking about baby daddies and getting high and, being big and boisterous and outrageous and, like Monique, not that, to throw shade on her because she's a very talented comedian, but that's, like the Apollo set, they call it the Chitlin circuit, right? And it was, and I think that's also why I did have challenges getting representation in the business, because I didn't fit that stereotype. And honest to God, because bookers and managers are so unimaginative. Same with agents, they didn't know what to do with me. I wasn't this cute little blonde who talked dirty. I wasn't an Amy Schumer. I wasn't I wasn't a Monique. I wasn't a Samore. What do we do with Karith? We've never seen anything like this.
Although you were a Huxtable for a while. Can you talk about that?
That's one of my jokes. Yeah. So when I do, because I mean, and this still happens a little bit, not as much anymore, but I get on stage and people stare at me like, that hair, that ass, those are definitely Black, but that voice, no, not so much. And then I explain, listen, you guys are looking at me like I'm crazy. I go, but I can't help it. This is who I am. I'm like Lisa Turtle from Saved by the Bell, right? Or Hillary from the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air Black. And I did. I used to say I was a Huxtable until people started thinking my dad tried to roofie my Girl Scout troop. I dropped that line. Thank you, Mr. Bud.
I love that joke. It always cracks me.
It's so wrong. Yeah, it's so funny.
What is it? I'm going to ask because I don't know. What is it about Black folks when you aren't Black enough, or if you do well? And I can't think of a put down that is applicable another way than calling someone an Uncle Tom, like just because they're successful or just because you disagree with them politically. Like, it's such a horrible thing to do to somebody, to call them that. To dismiss their years of work and, their success. I just can't think of what it is. There must be something that we say in another way that's similar, but it just is such an ugly term. And it's so dismissive to something that I think we're all trying to figure out how to do a better job at. Then you see the community doing it to itself.
Yeah. Listen, it's been a struggle. My entire life, I've kind of dealt with this. It's almost like being caught between 2 worlds, right? Where I wasn't Black enough for some people. I wasn't, I certainly wasn't white. Because of that, I had to learn early on that my identity didn't revolve entirely around my skin color, nor should it for anyone. And that's actually part of the messaging that I take in the work that I do in the diversity and inclusion realm. I right now am revolutionizing how we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, not only because it's been done so poorly for so long, but we still need to address things, but we need to do it in a new way that's really, truly inclusive of everyone. Because, to say you're only diverse if you're a person of color or you're a woman, you're part of the LGBT plus community or differently able, like, that's bullshit. Like, everybody belongs in this conversation. And it's so counterintuitive to say, let's talk about diversity and inclusion, but we're just going to focus on what separates and divides us. Right? And you're in this group and you're in this category, you're in that. And if you don't understand what these people are going through, then you're horrible and you're evil. And if you are in this category, then you're marginalized and you're this. And I'm so done with the victimization and the vilification. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that racism and sexism and homophobia and anti-Semitism, I'm not saying those things don't exist. They certainly do. But if we're going to really address it, really tackle it in a way that gives everybody a voice and a part in the conversation, then we have to stop with the division.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that goes back to our identities and how we identify. And we need to really rethink what it like who we are. You know, are we our money? Are we our education? Are we our skin color? Are we just our gender or our sexual preference? No, we're multifaceted. We're not monoliths. And for people to be able to accept that, I think for some people it's a stretch. For some people it's incredibly freeing. But I think there are a lot of people who've never even thought beyond what they've been told to think of themselves.
That's a very interesting point. Like, I think, did you trademark Inversity?
I did.
Yeah, I want you to unpack it for us, but you started Stereotype 101, Inversity. It's kind of in line with what you're talking about, but please, like, illuminate the millions of listeners out there on what this is.
I love it, millions. So yeah, the idea for me was to, even the word diversity, right? You look at the word, the root of it is divide and division. And we're never going to get to where we want to be if that's where we keep focusing. It's like the law of attraction, right? What you put your energy and attention toward, you get more of. Mm-hmm. So let's stop focusing on what separates and divides us, and let's focus to what I call inversity, which is, what do we have in common? How can we be truly inclusive of one another? But most importantly, and this is really the most critical aspect, is how can we be introspective? Meaning understanding your value, your worth, your connection to humanity. Because when you can see those things in yourself, that's when you can then see them in someone else. And I think that's really the key to kind of like flipping the switch on all of this. Because, you know, so many people are unhappy, right? They don't treat themselves well. They don't understand their own value. So how could you possibly expect them to see it in somebody else, or treat someone else well, or be respectful of someone else? So while we've been trying to work from the outside in for all of these years, these decades, right? Let's work from the inside out. And then how we treat ourselves will be reflected in the world around us.
It's a great point.
Beautiful.
And it's one of the things I like to say about diversity. One, it's not just Black people and white people. It's a lot of things. Like, if you're going to have a diverse workplace, I should see a veteran, because I'm a veteran. You should see veterans. You should see young people and old people, companies that don't hire anybody who's over 50. You know, all of these different elements. And the other thing is the antonym of diversity is unity. So you don't get to have both of those things working together, you know. So we have COVID, which we're struggling with because we are a diverse country.
Right.
And we point to Finland or New Zealand, and they're like, look how good they've done. Like, but they're much more unified. They're a homogenous.
They are. Absolutely. Absolutely. No question. Same with Australia. And I think you actually just, Pete, made a really brilliant point. You know, diversity, and that's why I like diversity so much better, because diversity is so broad, right? I mean, you're talking about, like, you know, like people's ages and their politics and their religions and their this, and it's, you know, there's also diversity of thought, which needs to be part of the. I know, man. You have to cut me off.
Not on college campuses, young lady.
This is our world. I know. Yeah. So, and that's what kills me, is that that's being shut down right now and trampled on. And it's like, how are you going to grow as a person and a human being if you're not open to having other ideas put on your plate and table? It doesn't mean you have to accept them, but just to take them in and let them marinate and either be strengthened in your convictions or, you know, maybe be introduced to something new.
It's this whole, again, back to the diversity idea. We want diversity, but you damn well better think like I think. Otherwise, your values, I'm going to devalue you, you know? And so we go back to this prejudicial loop. Remember when prejudice and stereotyping was a bad thing to do to people, you know? And now, like, I can be assigned values and a policy position based upon how I appear to somebody. It's just like the craziest. It's the best way to piss everybody off. That's really what that is.
I don't think you're wrong.
Karith was.
Let's go back to comedy, Matt. Ask some comedy questions so we can talking about diversity for a minute.
Okay. Obviously, we met in LA, so I'd like to get your take, Karith, on the scene. You know, you were in New York for years, then LA, and you've traveled the country. How would you compare and contrast the coasts and the flyover states?
Oh, wow. I mean, I've been really blessed to have done comedy from Washington State to Washington, D.C.
Mhm.
And, I mean, the number one rule in comedy, well, I guess first off is be funny, right? But truly, it's know your audience. And I don't think you're going to really know your audience unless you are in front of them and you have traveled the whole country. And there is a different vibe on the coast, without question. What was really fascinating for me was, coming to LA from New York. I mean, I started comedy in New York, and thank God I did, because I probably would have been too chicken to have started anywhere else and then migrated to New York. Like, ignorance is bliss, right? I had no idea who I was hanging out with. I mean, I knew I was hanging out with them, but I didn't know Patrice was. I mean, I did, but I didn't, and then I was his co-host on the Black Phillip show, which is so funny because I get people who are just discovering him. There's a lot of teenagers and like college kids, and they're like, Patrice was amazing and I loved you. And, and they'll leave these like random comments on my website. But, there's just different energies in different parts of the country. And I certainly have jokes that I modify based on where I am in the country, whether it's in the South, the North, or East or West. And I feel like, because I've traveled the country and done comedy in so many places and for so long, I should have an honorary psychology, sociology, and anthropology degree.
I agree. Yeah.
But I think that's also really what, gives me that extra boost with the work that I do, with the diversity stuff, as far as having these conversations and knowing how to have them. I mean, you have to know your audience and how to talk to people. And that with comedy, you have to know how to get people on your side within seconds. Otherwise, you are in for a shit time on stage.
Absolutely. So I'm just adjusting my lighting here as we go. For those few out there who haven't seen Can We Take a Joke? It's a documentary starring Karith Foster. Came out in 2015, I believe, where free speech is the issue, but also on free speech specifically on college campuses. And I've been really impressed with not only what you did on the documentary, but what you've done from it or since then. Please let us know kind of how you took that and springboarded to some of the cool stuff you're doing now.
Well, that's honestly, this goes back to you, my friend, because
thank you.
No, really, truly. If you and I hadn't met, and we met through an ex-boyfriend of mine, did you know that he was my ex?
I did after I knew you for like 3 years.
You didn't know that beforehand?
It took a while. Although when you came, I thought, I'll be quick. I thought you just wanted to like watch the show. Just kind of like get an idea of this
right.
Red Rock show I used to host. And this guy, Steve, who's very mild-mannered, really smart, super nerdy. I like him a lot, but just kind of, a bit of an odd duck in a good way.
Yeah.
He's just like, she is a big deal, and like was so serious about it. And I was like, okay, he's never acted like this before. So I brought you up, and you were fantastic. So that was.
Wow. Oh my God, that's so funny. I didn't know he said that about me. Yeah, that's another story for off camera. But yeah, so that was my ex, and so I met you and absolutely like just had the best time doing your show, and then I met your brother and sister-in-law who instantly became family, and then we actually became family because we're godparents all around now, and they asked me to be in their documentary, Can We Take a Joke? And I was so honored because of the work that I did as a comic on stages, but and as a comic and as a journalist and as somebody who just is such a proponent for free speech to understand more clearly what threat was underway on college campuses, where again, this is supposed to be where you're growing and learning and exploring and expanding your horizons. And to hear that, so many comics didn't want to do it anymore. And it was, becoming kind of a lost art because everybody was getting offended. Well, you can't say that because my cousin's uncle's nephew is a gay Muslim. And it's like, what? We're not even, first of all, that's like 6 degrees of separation and you're offended. Okay.
And gay Muslims are the coolest. So
right. Actually, one of my very dear friends is a gay Muslim. Rashad Manji. She's amazing. And she's such a free speech advocate too. She's amazing. She wrote a book called Don't Label Me. But so like the idea, like to be able to be part of a project that really kind of took to task like what's happening on campuses across the country and have the opportunity to have, and it was such a well done film. Courtney and Ted they killed it. And it just received such great accolades. And, it was shown at the museum before it closed, and it garnered a lot of really great attention. And it also really spurred me to start the nonprofit that I created called Frame. It's now called Frame, which stands for Foster Russell Alliance for Meaningful Expression. And our mission is to take educational programming that promotes free speech, inclusion, and social change to university and college campuses.
Wow. And take us through that, because, it's been a few years since I've been on a college campus, Pete as well.
Well,
we see the headlines, and I remember back when I was a student, there were like the ones that made the noise, and then there were the 90+% that were somewhere in the middle, and I was kind of one of those. What is it like now? Because I really don't know.
So it's interesting. Well, obviously right now everything is virtual, but I did something for a very well-known school. It's actually, and the school itself, if they could have planned for coronavirus any better, I don't know how, because they actually do everything online. The exception of the first year, everybody's there in person in San Francisco on campus. And then they go off to their corner of the world or wherever they want to live and take classes online. Excuse me, it's called Minerva Schools. And it was founded by a gentleman, a brilliant man by the name of Ben Nelson. He's a CEO. And I've spoken with him several times, and they brought me on this year to do their foundation and to talk about, with the entry class, about, what's going on and with diversity and inclusion, but how, we can keep these conversations going, because it's so important. And that's part of the programming, right, that Frame does, because it is about how we frame society and our parts in it, and our roles in it, and how we reframe situations. And I use humor, because I will always be a comedian at heart. And I use humor in a lot of the work that I do, because I think it's such a wonderfully, it creates such a neutral space, right? For people who typically will come in either on the offense or the defense, just depending on where they're coming from. And it neutralizes everything so that they're open. And we also know, like, as comics, like, laughter has a physiological effect on you. It relaxes you. It fires off certain neurons, so you're a bit more open to hearing things and new ideas. You're a bit more accepting. And I have a joke about, just the struggles that I've faced from growing up being, one of the only Black people in my classes ever until even sophomore year of college. And I even talk about struggling with my weight. And the joke that I shared was how I'm okay with who I am as I am now. And, I've matured, and that's helped. I said, but it depends on where I'm geographically, how other people see me. Because in New York City, I'm pleasantly plump. In LA, I'm a beached whale. But in the Midwest, I'm anorexic. And it is awesome. And if you're ever having a fat day, you buy yourself a one-way ticket to Kansas City.
Oh, yeah.
Because you will feel like a supermodel like that. And the follow-up to the joke is, there's a bit more in there, but the end of it is, I said, what's wild is, in this country, we don't only have fat people and fat little kids. I go, we have fat pets now, y'all. Like, I have a friend who has a cat that weighs 22.5 pounds. And if that doesn't make your mouth drop open, let me put it to you this way. That's 4 bags of sugar with paws. I said, now, the only reason we know it weighed this much is because my friend had to take it to the vet because it was limping, right? Now, I assumed it was being crushed under its own weight. But turns out it was much more sinister. It was actually quite sad and tragic. Somebody had shot it. Now, it was fine. The cat lived. It was, please don't call PETA on me. I didn't do it. I said, but, at 22.5 pounds, I told my friend, I'm like, listen, sweetheart, at that size and that weight, somebody probably thought it was a fucking wildebeest. And I got a letter from the school from someone who, like, apparently it was like all buzzed around, that said I was fat cat shaming.
Are you serious? That's
when I
hilarious.
thought I heard it all, you guys, when I thought I'd heard it all.
Fat cat shaming.
Now, I've heard people say about the whole eating, in Midwest, I'm anorexic. Well, I was bulimic in high school. My sister had an eating disorder. And I'm like, I'm sorry to hear that. I wasn't making fun of you. I was talking about me, and it was a joke. But fat cat shaming, that took the cake. But then in that same day, about 3 hours later, I received, and it's a very international school. I received an email from a gentleman who will remain anonymous, from Pakistan, who said, I want to thank you. He goes, I don't know if you've heard that, people have been buzzing about what you said and this, because I guess it became like this deal with them. He goes, but I want to thank you so much for using your humor. He goes, and I appreciate your stance on free speech, because where I come from, we don't have that.
Yep.
And they legit don't have it. Like, we want to get, our panties in
no
a ball.
hyperbole with what he's saying.
No,
Yeah.
there was no hyperbole. Like, he meant it. And he, so it was almost like, do you here in America really even understand, like, what we have that you're willing to put at risk because you've gotten offended because you either didn't get a joke or you didn't agree with it? But you're still giving and letting somebody have the ability and the right to say that. And that doesn't mean I support hate speech as a free speech advocate, but I also know that the only way to combat hate speech and bad speech is with more and better good free speech.
Well,
And let hate speech be the terrible thing that it is. Like let it be in the light so you can be like, that's horrible.
Exactly. Let me see who you are, right? Because
Yeah.
when these people go underground, that's when we're in trouble.
Absolutely.
We had Daphne Maxwell Reed on the show. She was Vivian #2 on the Fresh
Yes,
Prince.
I love her.
And she's so great. And I said, what are your thoughts on Bill Cosby? And she said, he is my friend, because I've known him for decades. And she also knows his legacy in the town, what he's done for the access for Black folks who want to act, how to manage money. And there's so many stories where, like, Bill Cosby taught me how to do this. He normalized this. Yes, it was a Black family on the Cosbys, but it really didn't matter, because he was so good at that. So you can't just look at the bad side of the scale and dismiss it. She's like, yeah, he did horrible things, and those are bad. However, there's a whole lot of good on the other side. You have to balance the scale.
Nobody, again, it's back to this being a monolith, right? If he was a completely awful, horrible, evil person, he would have never gotten as far as he did.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, what he did was horrible.
Yeah, of course.
We knew about it.
No, we're not arguing with that.
There are other people in Hollywood who do just as horrible things, if not worse. We just don't hear about it. So it's this really kind of wild world that we have to figure out, how we classify people. Can you separate the artist from the art?
Mm-hmm. The cat shaming from the joke. Can you? So, what's it like teaching? Well, preface this. I'm super impressed, Karith, with how you constantly reinvent what you're doing, whether it's a pandemic or not. You go from like comedian to humorist, and now I follow you online, and you're this lecturer at Stanford, among other places. How'd you get into that, and what's that like?
It's awesome. I love it. And it's, what's so cool is that everything that I've done, Matt, from the very beginning, even from the journalism degree, right? It's all just kind of snowballed and accumulated. And trust me, there were times when I was working that 9-to-5 office job and I'm like, why am I here, God? What is going on? Why am I in HR? This is not my life's purpose. And now I speak to corporations because you know what I mean? And I have that background, so I know what they need and I know how to talk to them. So it's one of those, everything for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's all of the pieces have kind of come together. And it's a beautiful thing. And I, the reason I lecture at Stanford is, again, going back to the view. My friend, who I stayed in touch with, created this course called Reputation Management for the Graduate School of Business. And
offline.
she thought, well, why don't you come in and talk about, having to save Don Imus's reputation and then ultimately having to save your own. And I did. And I thought it was just a one-off thing. But every year I got voted favorite speaker. And so I've been back like 8 years in a row.
Wow.
And because of my success with that, and one of the other people who was, part of that in that faculty, that person became the head of the Knight Hennessy Scholars Program, which is Stanford's equivalent of the Rhodes Scholars. And they brought me in to be a luminary and to have office hours and be a lecturer. It actually happened in January of last year, so thank God it happened before COVID hit. But so it's, and another thing I'll be, I'm just open. I'm really open to the universe and now to where I'm being led, and I'm using my intuition. I'm using my skills, and I'm following my passion. And my passion really is, and it's always been the same. It's never diverted. My passion is to bring people together.
Mm-hmm.
And while it was just, comedy, it was through laughter, right? Now it's through, we are so divided. We've got such polarization happening in this country. We are pit against each other intentionally on a regular basis. What can I do to help heal? And so it's, I feel so fortunate and so blessed to not just have these gifts, but the ability to, and the spaces to plug in and use them.
Absolutely. Spoken like a true luminary. So I noticed behind you, Karith, you have a book.
I do.
And last night I read 101 Ways for a Great Laugh, which I really enjoyed, but I want to... this is an book, can you talk about it, please?
Sure. So this is You Can Be Perfect or You Can Be Happy, which I just happen to have right beside me, actually, because I have to sign it and get it out. But I wrote this book. It started, the idea for it came years ago. I just had my first daughter, and who's now 8, and she was a lot smaller than we had anticipated. She was 4 pounds 10 ounces, even though the midwife and the pediatrician, like the OBG rather, was saying, oh, she's going to be 6.5 pounds, which I was a small baby. And we had her, and she was this tiny, and she wasn't latching. I was trying to nurse, and I didn't know she wasn't latching until a few days later when she's just dropping weight, when she was getting nothing. And basically, like, she could have died. And we didn't realize this till the midwife, because the doctor was of no use. The doctor was like, oh, babies lose a little weight when they're born. Okay. When you're 4 pounds 10 ounces, you can't afford to go down to 3 pounds 18 ounces. You know what I mean? Like, come on. So, 14 ounces. So we go to the midwife, and the midwife grabbed some breast milk from another mom from the fridge and put a tube into my kid's mouth. And it was literally like watching a black and white TV turn color. And it was like, oh my God, my kid was dying. And I beat myself up like nobody's business. And anybody who's a parent, man or woman, I don't care who you are, like it's that like the meme, you've got one job. And that one job is to keep this person alive, at least till 18.
Yeah, then they're on their own.
Yeah, you're good. I did what I could for you. And so, in the midst of just beating myself up terribly, one of my best friends who shares a birthday with me came up to visit, and she said, look, Karith, here's the thing. You can be happy or you can be perfect. I choose happy. And while the heavens should have opened up and a chorus of angels should have sung, it was just like, oh, what a nice thing for my friend to say to make me feel better. But that stayed in my head, and I flipped it around a little bit to you can be perfect, you can be happy. But I thought about it more and more. Like, yeah, you can be perfect or you can be happy. And then I realized how much of my life I'd spent trying to be perfect, right? The perfect friend, the perfect daughter, the perfect student, the perfect employee, the perfect comic, like all this stuff, all this time, all this energy. And to what avail? What was that actually costing me? And it was costing me time. It was costing me energy. It was costing me money in some circumstances. And it was costing me joy and happiness. And that was a really big wake-up call for me, because I'm like, if I'm doing this, then there's got to be a bunch of other people doing this too. And so that's why I was like, I got to get this book out. And the tenets of the book are, getting back to the basics. And I've created several speaking programs around it and a coaching program. One of the speaking programs is, the gift of GIST, get your shit together, GYST. Sometimes people just need to hear that, right? Or you're in that boat, like, I just got to get my shit together. And while I'm not the expert or claim to be, or a therapist or anything like that, but having experienced it, I do feel like I can speak from that place. And as somebody who's constantly, working on herself and improving and has had some modicum of success, I feel like I can share.
Thank you for sharing it.
Thank you.
Do you think you're a good mom now? Or are you still pretty hard on yourself?
I think, especially the people who are like, I don't know if I'm doing this right. They're usually the ones who are doing it pretty good. It's the people who are like, I got this down. Mopping is so easy. I don't have to. No, honey, no. You need to. You need to read the room and do a self check.
How old are your kids?
They're 8 and 6.
Oh my gosh!
Let me tell you something. You are not a real parent until you have accidentally killed one of your children's pets. Okay. I don't care how many cesareans you had, how many hours of labor you were in. You do not know the pain of parenthood till that gerbil is face up, stiff as a board, and you're doing CPR chest compressions, contemplating mouth to snout. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me just tell you, it gets worse because you don't control how your kid is, who your kid is, and there'll be these things that are in chapter 920 in the parent book, and you're like, my book goes to chapter 4.
Uh-huh.
It's like, what on earth is this nonsense that I'm supposed to know how to deal with? And there's literally like, you have to breathe through it, you have to drink and go for a walk with your significant other, and then come to this conclusion: there is no good answer. We're just going to have to pick something and do that.
Listen, you know what? I mean, our theory is they're going to be in therapy for something. At this point, they're going to be in therapy for something. And, let it be for us being, too parenty or too strict or too, but it's funny because Matt knows my husband. My husband's Australian, which means he has no filter whatsoever. He's as Australian as they come. And I'm a comedian. So these poor kids, I mean, they're funny as hell. They're really funny. They have a great sense of humor. The other day I was, so we're homeschooling, like we're officially homeschooling. I think the line is it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a winery to homeschool one.
Yes, it does.
And we were like wrapping up with the day and the kids were like, hey, can we watch a little TV? I'm like, sure, go ahead, whatever. And I'm cooking dinner. And I hear the older one, the 8-year-old, say to the 6-year-old, hey, sissy, let's watch something with famous people. And the little one goes, yeah, rich and famous people. And the older one goes, sissy, everybody who's on TV is rich and famous. And I'm like, hey, guys, mommy's on TV. And I've been on TV probably more than I watched it this year. And I go, am I famous? I'm on TV. And then my older daughter goes, are you on Muppets Now?
Ooh.
I'm like, did you? No. I go, no, I'm not. She goes, then I'm sorry. I'm like, okay, I will remember this. And it's, the horrible thing is you can't ground anybody right now anyway, because we're all grounded.
Yeah.
We're all grounded.
I love when I hear like these great stories about these moms. Like I think Miranda Lambert was one recently where like the kids at school away from mom, and the teacher's like, tell us what your mom's favorite hobby is. It's Miranda Lambert or, whoever it is, someone super famous, like doing the laundry. That's her hobby. It cracks me up. It's so funny. Feeding the cat,
They're so funny. They're so funny.
Yeah. So have you had any parents, I guess, when they're in school or teachers reprimand them for their free speach advocacy?
And their Australianness. Well, so they were in Montessori school. And then when everything happened last year, they weren't. Mm-hmm. So we've literally been doing homeschool. Like we're legit homeschool, not even like with other teachers. Like it is me and the Aussie.
So you
yeah. So the reprimanding has been coming from us. Like, I can't believe you said that. Well, no. So, and my husband will do most of it because I'm upstairs, in the office giving presentations and working and marketing, all that stuff. And the other day I hear, because I'm upstairs, I hear, there it is. And I'm thinking they're saying, ooh, there it is. Like, oop, there it is. Like the song.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, they were actually singing poop. There it is. Poop, because they had to pick a word and then write it in a sentence. Oh. And the word they picked was poop. So I'm like, okay, great.
You're 6 and 8. I think there's no better word.
No. We're at that age where poops are funny, farts are hysterical. I know your boys think that.
Yes, they do. Yes.
Yeah. So I just keep thinking this too will pass. This too will pass.
Probably not. Oh, maybe the girls. I don't know.
I hope it does.
I have no hope for my sons. They'll be 35. Go,
Right.
I'm very proud.
Speaking of terrifying parent things, I've had a lot of people on the show say, and then my father said to me, or my mother said to me, and it's these like 8 words out of 50 million words. We all have these statements that your parent says something to you, and you're like, "Ow, that's going to hurt the rest of my life," And it's simple things, like when someone says you'll never amount to nothing, or your dad says you're worthless and stupid, and you're like, "Oh, okay, I believe you." Like you can say the simplest thing to your kid in a moment of weakness or whatever it is, and it will absolutely stick to them. And with you and your husband being as verbose and funny and everything else, you just never know when that bomb is going to go off. But all of us have that happen.
Yeah.
You're going to be in therapy for something.
Right.
We try to be really cognizant of our words. We try to, use them wisely. We try to, whenever they say can't, we say, you can't say can't in this house. Like, that's not a word we use. And our kids have such an incredible vocabulary. And I don't know if it's because I'm so verbose, because I'm a speaker. Like, when my little one was little, my older one was little, she'd say, instead of I need water, she's like, Daddy, I need to hydrate. I need to hydrate. And the 6-year-old the other day was trying to show her sister something. She's like, let me demonstrate. I want to demonstrate it for you. Let me show you.
Yeah.
But then, I'll never forget I had one of them in the car. They were in their little car seat and we were in traffic. And I know it was my husband who planted the seed because I don't talk that way, but somebody cut me off. I was like, oh, I can't believe it. And my little one goes, Mommy, was that a dickhead? Yeah, honey, that was a dickhead. So they pick up on what you say. And so we do have to be careful with the messaging and just distribute as much love as possible.
Oh yeah. Well, you're doing a great job of that.
Thank you. Dickheads and all.
Yeah, there's always going to be dickheads around us. You got to learn how to navigate.
I wanted to jump in here real quick and just mention the fact that the reason why Matt and I are doing this is because Bastards Canteen is part of the Save the Brave family. And this episode is brought to you by Save the Brave. Obviously, it's Break It Down show, but if there wasn't a pandemic, we'd already be doing this, but we're going to be doing comedy shows at Nick's Canteen, Bastards Canteen in Temecula once his performance stage is open. So everybody, we're doing these kind of just priming the pump, bringing comedians on. Matt knows so many of them, and it's been so great to do this. So when you guys are watching this, if you want to support Save the Brave and you're in Temecula, of course, come down any night because there should be something live going on, but in particular on the comedy nights, so you can see people like Karith when she's in town and available and willing. But I appreciate Matt for setting these things up, and I appreciate you for coming on and sharing your time. And I'm not trying to close the show down. I just got to make sure I say those words.
Good. Yeah,
because that's why we're doing this. And as soon as we can get out and see real comedy shows again, I'm super excited to see you if you're going to be on the road, or whoever it is that's going to be doing their 5 minutes to 90 minutes. We all need some comedy. We all need to be showing how ridiculous we are, by the way. Too. So,
yeah.
Amen.
We need more of that.
Yeah.
Well, I love being on here, and I appreciate what you're doing. I also want to thank you for trying to keep comedy alive, because it's not just comedy for the masses. Comedians need to do it too. I mean, this is a lot of people's lifeblood, because we enjoy sharing and making people laugh and hearing it. It's cathartic and it's healing all around.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Matt, anything in closing?
Where can we learn more about Karith if we want to buy your books, hire you for lots of money?
So my website, I very fortunately received the name from my parents of Karith. There are not too many other Kariths out there, and karith.com is my website. My email is actually karith@karith.com. And my last name is Foster, so a lot of my handles are at Karith Foster. So on Instagram, although on Facebook it's at Foster Karith. That's my fan page, because my personal page is like totally full, which is crazy. I should probably just switch over to a fan page. But Anywho, and yeah, you can get my book on Amazon. You Can Be Perfect, You Can Be Happy, which I just saw Todd DeVoe was on here saying he got a copy for his wife for Christmas, which is so cool. And yeah, I mean, I'm on Twitter. Not so much. I mean, I try to put it all in one place, right?
Yeah.
But, so Facebook, Instagram are probably the best places to follow me. Every now and then I'll put some funny stuff on Twitter as well. But Instagram, I just posted a picture. Well, I haven't put it on Instagram yet. It was on Facebook. My husband. So, we did the Elf on the Shelf for Christmas. And as you all know, that can be quite tedious. But my husband was very dedicated and took care of it. And the girls were just so excited every morning to see what this elf did. And he did some very Australian things. Let's just say that. I caught him in a couple scenarios with the LOL dolls, some beer. That's all I'm going to say. And so after Christmas was over, which I'm like, oh, thank God, no more of that. We had baby Yodas. And these baby Yodas, he's like, let's do some Jedi stuff with them. So these baby Yodas have been doing things like, my older one notices patterns. She's very smart. So the first thing they were doing was eating some pirate booty on the sofa.
That's good stuff.
So she's like, oh, snack. And then they had water guns, spray bottles pointed at each other the next day. And she's like, attack, and which is on my mug, snack, attack. And then the last one is protect. Well, my husband forgot to set up protect. So he's yelling at me going, Karith, she's coming, she's coming. And so I'm like, oh my God. And I had like 90 seconds. So I grabbed some tape and I'm in the kitchen. I grab tape and I grab a knife from the silverware drawer. And I taped this knife around baby Yoda's hand. And what was supposed to be super adorable looks like Chucky. Like, it looks like he'd been on a murderous rampage the night before. And my kid goes, Mom, come quick, baby Yoda's got a knife. And it's not even a butter knife. So again, they'll be in therapy for something.
Yeah.
Give us something to talk about.
I don't want to take any more of you guys' time. It's the weekend. I've already had a couple of beers myself, so I've started. Yeah, I want to give you guys a chance to do that. Everybody should definitely go support Karith on her social media sites or go to her website, as she said, karith.com, or get the book. I'm flashing these things through. If you're on the podcast side, look in the show notes. That stuff will be in there. And just in general, thank you so much. And also a shout out to Todd and EM Weekly. I know you guys did a podcast over there, so definitely go check out what Todd does, because emergency management matters, and he will help you get better at it, whether you're a professional or a citizen who's like, I'm prepared. You're like, you were not prepared. So everybody can learn from Todd's work. Thank you so much, Todd. I'm going to be good here. Anything you all want to say in closing? I'm going to leave it to you, and then we're going to sign off.
I'm good. I just want to say thank you again.
It's good to see you both.
You
Hope
too.
to see you in real life very soon.
Yeah, please. Yeah. All right. I'm going to sign off. Stand by.
Take care.